Greetings. My name is Paul Ellis Jackson, and this is,
I'm Karen Robb.
and we are both associate ministers associated with two churches here in Wichita. Karen and I have been talking over the summer about starting a conversation that we could include our congregants, guests, friends, other people, related around this idea of religion and kind of how we approach it. But anyway, we're going to kind of see how this goes. We've got a working title. We're calling it Think Again, and that is just an homage to Reverend Gary Cox, who was University Congregational Church's second senior minister, and we lost him way too soon in the late 20s, or no, 2006 or 8. One of those. Yeah, I should know. I've got it written down. Anyway, so kind of to kick us off, I thought we'd start with introductions, so I'll let Karen start.
Oh, just introducing
Yeah,
myself
yeah,
as
where you're at,
okay.
and
Well, I'm at Plymouth Congregational Church here in Wichita, and I've been there now for over 11 years, serving as the associate minister, as Paul said, and I also serve as assistant um, professor at Bethel College in North Newton, just part time. So I keep pretty busy and get to perform around town as well. So wear a lot of hats.
you might recognize her if you've ever gone to music theater, or that's mostly where you work
That's
now.
mostly where I work
Yeah,
now. Yeah.
cool.
Oh.
I'm Reverend Paul Ellis Jackson. I'm the associate at University Congregational Church. Our two churches, Plymouth Congregational and University Congregational, have a long history. In fact, my congregation is celebrating its 40th anniversary in April. My congregation is actually an offshoot of Plymouth, and someday maybe
Maybe
we'll
we'll.
chat about that, or
Maybe.
maybe not.
And Plymouth is 137 years old, and we just celebrated this past October our 100-year anniversary of our sanctuary. So the
The
building itself is 100
beautiful
years old.
Gothic sanctuary, yeah, really nice. And then it was destroyed by fire in
98.
'98. Wow, my goodness, but rebuilt beautifully.
Rebuilt. Yep.
Oh, cool. So I want us to just share with you a little bit about how we got to our current place in life, how we came to ministry, how we came to these churches. And, I talked about Gary Cox, and I think you're going to see a recurring theme here as we talk about this that he played, I know for my life and I know for Karen as well, a pivotal role in both sharing his theology and his call to ministry. But as I unpacked my call to ministry, I realized how much of it revolved around Reverend Dr. Gary Cox.
Yeah. So well, as a kid, my family didn't go to church very much. We when we did attend when we were living in New York State, we attended a Methodist church. And then when we moved to Canada when I was 8 years old, we attended the United Church of Canada, um, on and off. But my dad never wanted to go. He would go on Easter, and that was about it. Um, and so mom eventually got tired of forcing us kids out of bed on Sunday morning and taking us all on her own. So when I was about 12, she gave up on that. And I didn't really, other than maybe the occasional Christmas Eve service or a wedding or a funeral, I did not really go to a church for about 20 years. And well, I guess I had a view of the church as being exclusive and anti-gay and judgmental and
Not approachable.
yeah, and just I didn't believe the stories in the Bible to be factual, true, having so I just kind of I didn't need it. I didn't think I needed it. And then the 9/11 happened, 2001, and that was on a Tuesday, and I said to my husband, well, actually, before that, we had Tim and I had a 2-year-old daughter, and and Paul and I were in a show together that summer, Showboat at
Sure.
Music Theater Wichita,
Yeah.
and I had a conversation with him. I said, I'm wondering if maybe we should start attending a church for Katie's benefit, so that Katie, as she grows up, can kind of make her own decisions about religion and what she believes and doesn't believe. And he said, well, you should come to my church.
It was my one time proselytizing.
And I said, well, what church is your church? And he told me, and so I kind of put that in the back of my head and then forgot about it. Um, but then September 11th happened, and that was Tuesday. And on the Thursday, I said to my husband Tim, I said, I feel like I need to go to church. And he's like, okay, what church do you want to go to? And I said, well, Paul invited us to that really pretty white church over on the east side of town.
White in color, not necessarily. I mean, it is predominantly Caucasian. Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so we went, and we had to sit in chairs in the aisle. It was so packed that Sunday, and I heard Reverend Dr. Gary Cox, who was just Reverend Gary at that point. He didn't have his doctorate yet, but I heard him speak, and I just sat there with tears in my eyes the whole service. And he said things that I don't know, you didn't think you would hear in church,
You couldn't say from a pulpit.
And
yeah.
And so I said to Tim the next week, let's go back. And we went from never attending church to never missing a Sunday.
Yeah.
We joined that fall, and then probably about November, someone called me and said, I didn't realize at the time that when you get new members of a church, you jump on them quickly and get them involved as fast as you can. So when they called me to serve on the Christian Education Board, I thought, surely you can find someone better. I have no idea anything about Christian education. No, we really want you to serve. So I served on the Christian Education Board, and then in 2003, my second daughter was born, and I only had 3 weeks off. I basically had to take my 2 weeks vacation and my week of sick leave for maternity leave.
Wow.
And I had to go back to work after 3 weeks. And I just was crying and crying and crying that morning. And my husband was like, "What is the matter? I thought you liked your job." I was working as the costumer at the Crown Uptown Theater, plus I was performing. But I just was crying, and I said, "I don't know. I feel like there's something else I need to be doing, and I'm not sure what it is."
Wow.
And so I meditated on it, I guess, every night as I went to bed. And after a month, I showed up at a Christian Education Board meeting, and Gary Cox came in and announced that they were going to see if they could raise the money, I guess is how it was, to hire a youth director at University Congregational Church. And it was like this little voice in my head said, "That's your job," which was, and I kept it to myself for a couple weeks because I thought, well, that's great. People are going to think that's crazy. Still have no idea about anything.
Right.
I have a BFA in musical theater. How am I?
Little did they know.
Little did they know. So it was a kind of a long process. That was August of 2003, and they raised the money, and they finally advertised the job in like April of 2004, and then they did the hire, and I started in July of 2004, and that just kind of.
And your tenure here included us, you and I, collaborating and building a theater program, pretty much. And every spring, February, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
We would offer a musical or a concert, something, and Karen would usually produce and direct, and I would music direct and try to rein in musicians and stuff. And we had some great successes with that. We won't get into the details of how Karen ended up at Plymouth necessarily this time. It's a pretty long story. There's a lot of angst and a lot of post-traumatic stress for both of us, I think. Suffice it to say, Karen left University Congregational Church and was hired on as the associate minister at Plymouth in February of 2007.
2011 is what I left, yeah. Okay. And then I started there part-time in April.
Okay.
And full-time in August of 2011, yeah.
And you were the associate minister at that time?
There were actually three of us, yeah, and I hadn't finished my MDiv yet. Okay. And so initially I was like minister of faith formation or something is what they called it. And then once I finished my MDiv, I moved into that.
And recently you completed your doctorate, so it's now Reverend Dr. Karen Robb. Congratulations.
It is.
It's dynamite. Actually, what's interesting about both of our journeys will come in it will be useful later as we talk about, church dynamics and how committees and congregations work and how they change and how conflict occurs, but not today. So I came to ministry actually because of Karen's leaving in 2011. I had already been established here at University Congregational Church. I came in 1995. I sang for a friend's wedding that summer. And the pianist at that time, he said, Paul, we have a staff opening for our tenor soloist. Are you interested in auditioning? And, I knew these positions were around town. Often a church, if they have the funds, will have 4 or 8 paid soloists to anchor soprano, alto, tenor, bass. And I was a tenor, and I thought, you know what? Let me do it. So Bob Scott hired me on. He said, we'll give it a year. And that's our running joke. Every year he comes back to me and says, we'll try it another year, Paul. And, hey, your contracts are awesome. But anyway, and I started to, get more and more involved, served on committees. We did the shows. In 2013, I was the moderator elect. So that meant 2014, I was going to become the moderator. Because of the turmoil surrounding Karen's ouster, we lost our senior minister at that time, Reverend Dr. Gary Blaine. And we had 9 months in 2012 without a senior minister. We had brilliant interims. We had Reverend Dr. Carl Martin and Reverend Dr. Keith Williamson, who came in and helped us kind of shore up things and prepare for our next chapter as a congregation. In October of 2012, we called Reverend Dr. Robin McGonigal, who was already serving a church here in town, but she was ready for the next chapter in her life, and here she is. Early on in her tenure, she noticed that there was a need for an associate minister for her. So they took Karen's position, the funding and those pieces, and created this associate minister position. And she and I started having conversations, and I started thinking about my call to serve this congregation. And I realized that I, had been in ministry since my first day here. My first song that I offered, I always tried to think, is it meaningful to me, but would it also be meaningful to the congregation? Does it have good theology? And we'll talk about that on another podcast, what we mean when we say good theology. Anyway, I took the position in July of 2013. About 6 months later, it was obvious that I had gifts of ministry. Paul would call them charisms. I can never say that word right. I had these gifts. So I applied to Phillips Seminary, which I believe you went there.
I did.
Yes. And started my MDiv program in the fall of 2014. I graduated in the spring of 2017 with the Masters of Divinity. Now I'm currently in the DMin, the Doctor of Ministry program down there, the one that Karen just graduated from. So, we like to talk. I'm just following Karen around, so whatever she does, I'll just, I'll do the same thing. So anyway, we have been friends for a very long time, since the early 90s, I believe.
90.
One or two?
No, I moved here in 93, so shortly after that.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Long time.
That's okay. When we were both 10. Next, we're just going to do this briefly because we want to keep this between 15 and 20 minutes because we don't want to bore you. And Karen and I, we could talk for hours. We love this stuff. But to kind of get us thinking about what we're going to do with this time together, I've asked Karen to explain to me just a little bit of her basic theology, those underlying principles, like, do you believe in God? Where does Jesus fit into that? Where does the Holy Spirit fit into that? So.
Oh, okay. Paul, yeah, I have to keep it to 15 minutes.
15 to 20, you're fine. Yeah, right. We're still preaching on these.
So I am finding God more and more in the connectedness between people, in relationship.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah. So, and in in nature, I guess too. And I had someone make fun of me for this early on in seminary when I said something about in the ordinary, and they kind of rolled their eyes and were like, "Oh yeah, God's ordinary." And I'm like, I think so. I think we miss I think we miss the holy in those small ordinary moments.
Yeah.
Um,
Nice.
so
Awesome. Very similar. I was raised Southern Baptist, and then in high school I moved over to Methodism. I went my first few years of college to a small Methodist college down in Winfield. You might know it. Anyway, so that kind of colored my theological background. But when I came to University Congregational Church in 1995 and started hearing the amazing progressive liberal theology that was being preached from the pulpit here by Reverend Dr. Robert Myers, the founding minister, and then Gary Cox, I started to feel my theology kind of growing because of the preaching I was receiving, the beautiful, beautiful homilies and sermons, and just what was happening in this building. And then when you came, you brought even another element. You brought this performance piece that is so important, and I think,
well, yeah, I think I mentioned this in a sermon recently that I mean, our scripture talks about God being creator and human beings being created in the image of God, and so I feel like we are never closer to God than when we are creating.
beautiful. Yeah. And where I came out of seminary and where I'm kind of at with my doctorate is this thing about relationships between others and finding. I've always kind of found God in that space here between us. We can't really ever truly know another. I'm developing this theology of belonging because I think we all want to belong, and I think that comes and we'll get into some ancient Jewish philosophy here, but this idea that we come from the Holy One. Our spirits come from the Holy One upon our births, and they return to them upon our deaths. So our lives here on earth, we're yearning for that connection. And when we sense the Holy One in another person, I think most of us are like, oh my goodness, I'm so drawn to this person because of this spirit that they have. So, that's kind of the work I'm doing. My doctoral work, now, Karen's doctoral project was amazing, and I was delighted that I was able to be a part of it. And it ended up being a play basically around the stories of why people left the church. And really powerful. If you ever get a chance, I think there's a recording of it available.
There
Maybe.
is a recording. It's not made public.
Oh, okay. Never mind. I didn't say that. But I have a feeling it'll be produced again, and you can always reach out to Karen about at least reading it because it's a beautiful piece, and it got her the credential of doctor of ministry, doctor of the church, as it were. Mine is going to be about this idea that I think that we all have more in common than we think, especially regarding religious ideas. And I just think sometimes we get lost in these words. And so the working title of my project is What We Talk About When We Talk About God. Because more often than not, I think we're talking about very similar things. So yeah, you're going to see a lot of this idea that God is in the space. He's between. Wow. God is between us. That was some embedded theology of me using the masculine pronoun, and I've had to work on that coming out of a Southern Baptist tradition. So, and that's another podcast later down the road. We just want to close briefly here with our plans for this time together. It's kind of a regular
Yeah.
series
Yeah.
as our spirits kind of lead us for these kind of like just there. We've got the seeds for some really interesting conversations, I think. There's some people I want to bring in and have the two of us interview and have conversations with some of our congregants and some other religious leaders in town. Please reach out to both of us with your ideas, things that you are curious about. We'd love to hear it. Karen's email is
KROBU@plymouth-church.net.
and I'll make sure that gets in wherever we post this. I'll make sure it gets in that tag there. So one more time, Karen, your email?
KROBU@plymouth-church.net.
Awesome. And I am PAUL at UC Church, so UCCHURCH.org. And until next time,
Until next time.
blessings.